Welcome back, everyone. We're about to kick off the last session of today's 2020 Trans-Youth Forum. Thank you all for joining us. It's been an exciting, informative day so far. Who's been with us the whole time? Big shout out to all of you. Remember that you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. The HiTOPS staff is moderating and will pass questions on to us, so let's get started. Hey everyone, I'm Kenny. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 14 and I'm on the HiTOPS Trans Youth Advisory Board.
Hi guys, my name is Grayson Axel. I am 19 years old and my pronouns are he, him, and this is my first year on the Youth Advisory Board.
Today we're talking about a bunch of topics that impact the transgender community. It's okay if you need to step away. You can leave the forum and rejoin at any time. It is our pleasure to introduce an American poet, editor, librarian, and activist, Cyree Jarelle Johnson. Yeah. Cyree, for anyone who isn't familiar with your work, can you tell us your pronouns and briefly a little bit about who you are?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Cyree Jarelle Johnson. I use he, him pronouns. I am a writer and a librarian and an artist for disability justice. I am the current Brooklyn Public Library poet in residence. I am also a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellow with the Poetry Foundation. And I won the Lambda Literary Award in Gay Poetry last year for my book, Slingshot. Yeah, and I'm one of very few trans men who are gay to win in that category.
Here at HiTOPS, we always start each group with an icebreaker question. We thought it would be cool to ask each speaker the same question. So if you could learn any skill instantly, what would it be?
I think it would be to learn any language. I have always had trouble learning languages, and I feel like if I could just like upload it or download it into my head, then I could live more freely in the world.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cyree. I found out that you actually attended one of HiTOPS groups when you were younger. How did you find out about HiTOPS and how was being in the support group helpful to you?
Yeah, I was in first and third when I was, maybe 14 to 16, and I had to come a really long way on the bus to get there, but I always did. And I found out about it through my guidance counselor at the time. I was having a lot of trouble with bullies. I was always really sincerely bullied. And so at one point, I was in the guidance counselor's office for some reason. And she recommended a program called First and Third at HiTOPS, which was pretty far from me either way, in both of the places I lived in high school. And yeah, being in First and Third was my world. It saved my life. And it was super important to me. And I met a lot of people who I still know to this day, actually.
Hi again, it's Grayson. Sorry, I was having some very, very horrible technical difficulties. Hi, Cyree. Joining. I didn't hear your last response. Do you mind if you go over your last response again?
Sure thing. I was just talking about my experience when I was in HiTOPS, those many years ago.
Okay. And Kenny, what question did you just ask? I really apologize. I was really having some really serious technical difficulties. I have an older computer, so outdated stuff can be a little challenging at times.
It's no problem. Glad you're back.
Thank you.
So we just asked about HiTOPS and Cyree's experience with HiTOPS, and we're about to ask him about the book.
Oh, okay. So are we actually we're talking about the book Slingshot.
Yeah.
So you actually published a book of poetry called Slingshot. We were lucky enough to have gotten a copy of it. I have to say, I could actually visualize what you were saying.
Thank you.
Slingshot won a Lambda Literary Award in gay poetry. Like,
Thank you.
can you explain to us like what the Lambda Literary Award is?
Yeah, the Lambda Literary Award awards the best gay, queer, bisexual, and trans books of the year, as according to other queer and trans writers and literary types. And so there's like so many categories. I wouldn't even pretend that I knew the number of categories that there were. And you send in your book or a bunch of copies of your book, and then they take a long time to like look at it, and then you get into like some people make it to the finals, and then there's a lot of librarians will just buy a bunch of books from there too. So you have those in your library, and then sometimes people win, and I won, and that was great because I hadn't initially, because I am both trans and gay, I didn't really know what category to put myself in, and I thought that I wouldn't do very well because I decided to go into the gay category, but I won.
Well, congratulations on that, man. Like, seriously, that's like a serious thing, especially with like, saying that a lot of people have, even like sat there and had a lot of different, like books that they like even put in to try to receive that award. So like, hand clap again, man. Like, seriously.
So I'd like to ask, what inspired you to write Slingshot?
Yeah, one of the things that inspired me to write Slingshot is just that there's so little about trans people who are not straight, particularly Black and brown trans people who are not straight. And so I wanted to have some work in the world that spoke to my personal experience of being a gay person who is also a trans masculine person. That was really important to me. But I also think that one thing that's really cool about poetry is that it gives you an and writing in general, it gives you an opportunity to let people see the world as you see it. And that's really important to me because a lot of times when we see incorrect representations of ourselves, it limits who we think that we can be. And so when people make art, or when I make art, I'm always thinking about how little there was, especially when I was coming out, like what that it reflected my life in any way. And so when I developed, the idea of myself in my head, it was often based on people who were really dissimilar to me, even if they were also queer or they were also trans. And so whenever we add our own unique art, our own experiences to the world, it means that we both have it. Like, I can go back and read my book now. It wasn't there before, and now I can read it and feel affirmed. But hopefully other people will read it and feel affirmed too.
That's amazing. I can say that I felt a connection to so many poems in this book. Like, I just, like we said in the beginning, like we actually got like a copy of like Slingshot, and it was like absolutely like amazing. There were definitely some darker themes. Are you comfortable telling us like if some were based on like true stories, like if you like actually experienced it, if like the language that you used in the poems were like figurative sort of speech, or were they a representation of what you've actually gone through?
That's a really good question. It's both, it really is for me always both, right? So like I think that one thing that poetry does really well too is that it takes the experience of what I really lived, right? Like things that really happened to me. And then it allows me to figure out what about what really happened to me is also like interesting over the course of life, human life, right? Like what experiences that I've had that other people have shared, right? So like definitely when I was a young person, I experienced homelessness. So like that is part of those poems. And bullying as well, both, at home and other places as well. So that's definitely in there. And then, like there's also some imaginative work. And so I think that whenever we deal with art, it's like true, right? And deals with our experiences, but maybe not like exactly, especially for the long poem that's the middle of Slingshot, A Machine of Mahogany and Bronze. I definitely was involved in Black Lives Matter, in the movement for Black lives. And so, yeah, like that's part about, like that part is true about me, but also like the person, like the speaker of the poems, like you can think of it as like the main character of the poems. That guy's not me. He's a little bit different from me. And I think that he has enough of me for me to see myself in him, but enough differently to, not be the exact same. So it's like yes and no.
It's really awesome. That's really awesome. I think that's really powerful too. Like seriously, thank you for like responding to that.
And so there's one thing that caught my eye when I first saw the book, because usually when readers, like even if they're just looking at a bookstore, the first thing you see is the title and the cover. So I wanted to ask, why did you choose this? And if you chose the cover yourself, and what was your thoughts behind this decision? Because it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. I'll put it up because I have one for, oh yeah, that came up a little more clear. Yeah. Thank you. Actually, no one's ever asked me this question in any interview. So thank you for this question. It's a really good one. So Slingshot is about protest in America, and it's about racism and transphobia and homophobia and oppression more generally, and how we play those out in our friendships and in our families and stuff like that. And so I had been listening a lot to Sly and the Family Stones' There's a Riot Going On, which has a cover with the American flag on it. And I think, that cover too, it was a response to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, right? So like they responded to each other. And so when I was thinking about my cover, I was like, okay, so we have What's Going On, and then there's a riot going on, and there's this different kind of American flag on it. And I think that coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement, in addition to work with disability justice within the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly with the Harriet Tubman Collective, I think that the truest representation for what I think America is right now is kind of flag burning, and also a commentary on climate change about America being underwater, because we are in many places. I know HiTOPS is in New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey. My family is historically from New Jersey, and some places that are shrinking. Sinking. So yeah, these are all things that I considered when I picked my book cover. And I did have a fair amount of control over what was on it. But that's not always the case. So I think that this was a really good question. Thank you, Kenny.
And so I also want to ask, who's your target audience? Who do you feel should or needs to read this book?
My target audience is definitely other trans people, particularly other transmasculine people. There aren't a lot of books about Black transmasculine people being published on major presses, but there are definitely some good ones coming out now. And so I feel great adding my voice to those books as well. There are lots of us writing right now. And I think that who needs to read this book? I guess it's kind of not up to me. You know what I mean? Like if someone reads the book and they get something from it, then they're the target audience. And if they read the book and they feel a little bit better about being in the world, then they're the target audience.
That's really awesome. How did you receive all their support from the different foundations and fellowships for Slingshot? I'm just curious about that. You're talking about the Landell Award, so yeah.
Yeah. So apply. You see them and you apply, and that sounds like I don't know, being like funny about it, but no, like when I see something that comes across my desk and there's money attached to it, or a scholarship or a fellowship, or I think that it might have money, I apply. I email them and I ask them for money. And I know that many people here are probably applying for colleges and things like that, and they're applying for scholarships. Apply for the scholarships. The worst they could say is no. And once you wrote a couple of them, you can just reuse stuff that you had before. So I really recommend, no matter what you're doing, whether you think you want to make a movie, you want to write a book, you want to go to school, please absolutely apply.
I think we got a Q&A question. Yeah, we got an audience question. Kenny, you want to tackle that, or you want me to tackle that?
Do you want to do this one? Because it's a bit lengthy.
Oh yeah, sure. This is as another member. Sorry, scrolling right now. As another member of the Youth Advisory Board, I was able to do some research. Oh goodness. Into your like just like I said, old computer.
Take your time.
Do some research into your work, and I realized we share the same hometown of Piscataway, New Jersey. I always felt like I was the first person in my middle school to come out as transgender. Even in 2016, some of my teachers had homophobic and transphobic beliefs. Do you have any advice for teachers and educators on fostering inclusive classrooms by not only for queer youth, but disabled and BIPOC youth as well?
That is a great question. Piscataway was not a place where I experienced bullying for those sorts of things, but Piscataway is very different when I was going to school. It was actually a lot like Blacker from my knowledge. And so like the teachers were also part of like a Black teachers collective. So I know that with things changing, like I'm sure that the climate has changed a lot. I was not out in middle school. I came out in high school. And then I came out as trans to others as an adult. So like in college. So our experiences are a little bit different in that way. But hey, Piscataway, we're out here. Always Piscataway. Absolutely. Do I have any advice for teachers and educators in fostering inclusive classrooms? Do I have any advice for teachers and educators fostering for disabled and BIPOC youth? I think that ultimately, let me think about that. That's a very good question. I will say as an educator, I think that the most important part about fostering an inclusive class is looking at your students like they are experts. Like my students always know lots of stuff. I've never had a student who wasn't talented and exceptional and wonderful. And I think that when we start at our baseline, that our students are smart and capable, regardless of the moment that we're seeing them at, I think that that's always really helpful and also humanizing. I think that sometimes having a very hierarchical classroom can be difficult when you think of yourself, and I'm a librarian. I'm a kind of librarian called an instruction librarian, which means I do teach, and I'm also a professor in the world and other places. And I think that like the idea that when a teacher doesn't know something, they're supposed to just pretend that they do. And I think that that's part of the reason why things get so bad for students, because it's like, if you don't know something, if you don't know how to be respectful of a trans student that you have, you should do some reading, right? Admit you don't know that thing and then learn it because it's possible to learn it, right? I think that teachers and educators should expect the same amount of rigor for themselves as they should for their students. So if you expect your students to be reading whole long books and doing all kinds of papers, and you find that you don't know something that's essential to their life, you should be the one to catch up about those kinds of things, because there are people writing books about how to serve queer youth in an educational setting, how to serve disabled people in all kinds of public settings. And there's certainly plenty of writing about race and being a teacher. So there's no excuse at this point. And I think we all have to take responsibility for ourselves as educators.
Can I just say what an excellent answer that was? That was so amazing. Okay. That answer, oh my God. Yes, Cyree. And also I want to just say too that the audience question came from Reese from Yab, who worked with us in regards to making this forum. So shout out Reese. Yeah.
Okay, so I say let's start going into a bit more personal questions. So you were diagnosed with autism at the age of 4 and with lupus at the age of 14. Most of us are aware of the autism spectrum, but what is lupus and how were you diagnosed?
Yeah. Whew. Okay, here's the story. So when I was 14, I got very, very sick, very, very sick. And no one knew what it was. I did not have insurance, health insurance. And so I stayed sick for a long time. And over that time, I lost my ability to do my own hair and experience a lot of physical pain, and I had to start walking with a cane. And so I recognized, but like, unfortunately, because of the way my family situation was, nobody really took me to the doctor, made sure that I was healthy or okay. And so by the time I got to college, I was really, really sick. And, when I was in high school, because I had to get most of my care at the ER, no one really found out why it just got worse. So when I got to college, and I was super sick, I eventually started going to doctors, and they would say, "Oh, it's just arthritis," or childhood onset arthritis or things like that. But I actually had a friend, like one day I was very, very sick, and my friend said, and I said, my arthritis is having a flare, and we were 20, and so what did she? I didn't figure that she was gonna know, but she looked at me and she said, arthritis doesn't flare, lupus does. And I was like, oh, like something clicked in my mind, and I realized that I had lupus. Thankfully, I realized it at that point because lupus can be deadly. So, yeah, so I got some medication, and here I am talking at the HiTOPS Trans Youth Forum, thankfully. Yeah, so that's my diagnosis story.
That's really heartbreaking, but like I'm really glad that you're getting, like, you got the treatment that you received and stuff. Like, seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, being a disabled young person, it's like not easy in any way. And like, like a lot of times, especially poor working class, disabled young person of color, is particularly a Black person. So, I'm glad to be here. And yeah, I think that that's one place where especially schools should provide more resources to their young people.
Well, I have a question. So this is like a diversity question. So members of multiple minority groups, LGBTQ, and people of color are more likely to be exposed to experiences of stigmatization, discrimination, and fear of rejection. Now you add a disability into that mix, and the stress and health outcomes would seem to rise beyond normal.
How do you feel the external and internal stressors of being in a multiple minority group have shaped your writing?
Yeah, so I write in form, and so what poetic form is, it's like a system of rules that decide what your poem is going to be before you write it, essentially. And so a lot of forms have been in use for, gosh, at least hundreds of years. Some forms have been in use for thousands of years. And so form is one of the ways that I shape my work to talk about those kinds of discriminations, because a lot of times if you write a poem and it's like, being trans is hard, when I go outside, there's violence against me and I have a hard time getting a job. And, I wonder what my life will be. I feel like I'm afraid to be rejected, right? People aren't always going to like listen to that as much as they will if you just, or maybe not as closely as if you change not the content of your work, like what it's about, but like the way you write it, right? So like if I write a poem and it's only every line is 6 syllables, right? When iambic pentameter is, 10 syllables and considered the natural length of a breath, then 6 syllables is like I'm holding my breath, right? I'm having like you can make someone feel what it's like when they read that poem out loud to be in a state of panic, right? And if you're down to like, let's say 3 syllables, like that's very urgent. And so it's not something that people notice all the time when they're reading on the page, but your brain notices it. And so I think that when I try to put disability in my work, that's part of what it is, because I don't want to say, things that have already been said, right? People can imagine, like people's assumption about lupus is that it's hard and difficult and deadly, right? And so if I say lupus is hard and difficult and deadly, right? People are like, yeah, like we know that. Okay, like essentially that's what they say. So if I, write a poem that gets smaller and smaller until the speaker isn't speaking anymore, that can give you the same kind of feeling without me having to say lupus 1,000 times. And I mean, it's a personal choice for, every writer to make for themselves if they want, what kind of writer they want to be. But for myself, I think that sometimes not saying something can get to the heart of things better than saying something. Because every time we're not saying something, you know, like we are though, you know, like both ways, you know, maybe if we're talking to a friend, we're saying it with our body, we're saying it with the things we don't say. And I think that that's really true. Like poetry is the art of that, right? It's the art of like subtext, context, of euphemism. And so, I think that all of those things are also ways that we can use to talk about our marginalization so that people don't just like listen to like what we're saying, but they experience it on another kind of level.
Right. Um, wow. Like I'm just in awe, like seriously, with like with you, Cyree, seriously. You did a TED Talk entitled "What is Autism Neutrality?" First, can you tell us about like the process of applying for a TED Talk? And then can you talk about like what autism neutrality is?
Sure. Yes. Right ahead of Light It Up Blue. Happy to do so. So applying for a TED Talk. So technically I did a TEDx talk. And that is like the more accessible of the TED Talks, because the TED Talk proper is like a whole, I guess like it's a more international thing. But TEDx Talks are for individual like institutions or, you know, like places. And they're all part of the TED network, but it's just like a little bit different. Because TEDx you can apply for. So when I heard that there was going to be a TEDx at Columbia University, where, you know, I got my MFA in poetry, I was like, what will I apply about? And then I thought about what I was an expert on, and having autism is what came to my mind. And so I pitched it, and then I did a bunch of interviews and lightning rounds to qualify, and they picked my TEDx talk called "What is Autism Neutrality?" as you said. And so autism neutrality is the acknowledgement that like autism is not in itself like good or bad. It's just like a regular thing that people have sometimes. And that when you start at the idea that like autistic people are neither like a bunch of geniuses who are all good at everything, but also awkward, or that like, I mean, the idea that we find in our dominant society that autistic people are unworthy of life and not very good and bad and should be excluded from society. You know, like the truth, like it is for most people, is somewhere in the middle, right? Like where it's like we are just regular people trying to make it through each day and have an independent or interdependent life that, you know, makes us happy. And that's the crux of what autism neutrality is.
Very informative. Thank you for telling us about that. Seriously. We have another audience question. Woo!
Yay.
So the audience question is it asks like, what can you say to people with autism that are being judged or bullied? Do you have any advice for getting through it?
Yeah. You know, I think that the hard thing about autism is that it's pervasive and, you know, developmental. So it starts pretty early in your life. And so I think that a lot of even before I was getting bullied at school, I was being bullied at home. And so that's the kind of bullying I think that changes a lot of like how you feel about yourself. And one thing that's really helped me over the course of my, you know, adolescence into adulthood is like remembering that like, if someone is being baseline mean to you, like just mean to you for no reason or for something that you can't control, it has absolutely nothing to do with you. It just doesn't have anything to do with you. It has everything to do with that person and the way that they're trying to assert themselves in the world. It does not have anything to do with you. Or, you know, especially when we talk about like bullying, because there's just this power imbalance where somebody wants to feel more powerful by being powerful over someone else, you know? And, you know, in a lot of ways, the way that I think about bullying now that I'm not in school and I'm an adult who you know, doesn't get bullied anymore, is it's like there's like bullying like among your peers or your family, right? But like they learn that bullying from the way that the world is structured, right? Like the idea that like a cop can come and like beat somebody up and kill them is a kind of bullying, right? That person was just trying to walk down the street, right? Or even like you know, governments going and bombing other countries that they impoverished. That's also a kind of bullying, right? So like when we think about what would stop bullying or like those sorts of things, or like what you can do, or like what got me through it, that's really what is the question. What got me through it is remembering that like people learn dynamics of oppression and they can unlearn them too. And that's not your job on the individual level, but as the world changes and as we all invest ourselves into a world that's more equitable and works more and more to not hurt people, just as a general principle, then the less bullying and judgment that there will be in the world. And so how I got through it, and this is the honest to goodness truth, is by applying myself to be one of the people who at least tries on my off time to make the world a less domineering place where the strong take advantage of people who are not asserting power in that way.
So like advocate, like sort of, right?
Advocacy, activism, you know, but even like volunteer work, like it doesn't always have to be like, oh yeah, advocate, like I have to be, because like to me, advocacy is like I stand out and I talk and like, yeah, sure, I'm an advocate, that's true. And like, but I think that like even more than any of that, it's like just making sure you're involved in the world and like, you know, bringing more balance and to the world by being not like that. One other thing that helped me tangibly is also I have a meditation practice, because you know workplace bullying is also a thing, and it's just something that I think it's important for us to have resilient strategies, but also to be proactive about preventing it in the first place.
Do you mind like telling us about that? I feel like, you know, with like everything that's going on in the world, like, you know, I feel like we all need a little bit of meditation, a little bit of like, you know, some sort of strategy to kind of zen.
Absolutely. Yeah. My meditation practice is incredibly important to me, especially as someone who lives with mental illnesses, right? So like being able to do things that recenter me, bring me back a sense of calm, it's just very important to me, because some of these things like, you know, I can't control the way that people look at me on the street or the way that they treat me, right? But I can control how much of that I hold on to. And meditation is one of the ways that I can, without the input of anyone else, come back to a place where I feel good and I feel like I am safe and healthy. And, you know, there's plenty on YouTube and, you know, that is guided meditations. There are apps. I use the Liberate app, which is all Black and brown and mostly queer and trans. I recommend it. And I know we need to move on.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us.
So one thing we haven't talked about yet is the Deaf Poets Society. You're the co-founder and poetry editor of Deaf Poets Society Literary Magazine.
Yeah, I'm no longer the poetry editor there, but I am one of the co-founders of Deaf Poets Society. Yeah, and it's specifically about deaf and disabled, you know, writers and also artists as well.
How did this, it's like you just said, it specifically centers around work by writers with disabilities and those who are deaf. How did this idea come to be, and why did you want a place for writers with disabilities to be able to share their work?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, maybe, like 5 years ago, Sarah Katz reached out to me because she was working at Poets and Writers, and she is a deaf person, and so she's a deaf poet, and she wanted to start an outlet for, or you know, a place where, a journal where deaf and disabled writers could share their writing without being minimized or pigeonholed, but just to celebrate deaf and disabled writing. And that's something that's happening like a lot. Like there's a lot of deaf and disabled art that's coming out. It's very cool. And also like really political, but like also just like interesting. It's interesting stuff. And I think that is very well aligned with like trans art that's being made too.
I was gonna ask, can any just deaf and disabled person who enjoys literature join the Deaf Poet Society? Because I really feel like, you know, like that's a thing that like, you know, a lot of people may be curious about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like not a club or anything. It's just like, it's a journal. You could submit there, and yes, anyone can. If you write poetry, nonfiction, fiction, or you make art, absolutely.
Great. Sorry. Trying to. Oh, okay. All right. So on to the next question. What does being a disabled writer mean in terms of like work you do and how you present that work?
Yeah, so being a disabled writer, it means that I have an active relationship to disability justice for me, right? So like I'm not just disabled, like yes, I have lupus and I have autism, but like I'm not just like descriptively disabled, right? Like it's not just because I have lupus and autism. I'm politically disabled, which means that I understand that like yes, our bodies all have physical differences, but it is actually ableism that is the disabling factor here, right? Like where disability is normal and natural, like people are either born disabled or like become disabled in normal ways over the course of their lives. There's nothing inherently like odd about being disabled. And so the fact that the world is set up for non-disabled people, it's because of ableism, right? And so if the world were structured for the people who actually live in it, who frequently become disabled, the world would look like a different place. So it is present in my work, but like I think maybe I said a little bit more about it before about form. I think that that's really where it is. But also I think that a lot of the disabilities that I end up writing about my work that become most obvious are like CPTSD or OCD or anxiety, right? And so my work is a place where I can bring my whole self and it's all just mixed into it. I don't even think about like, I'm not like sitting when I'm writing like and thinking about identity. I am not thinking about it. It's just coming through me. Like my wise mind is thinking about it, like the brain that doesn't think, of course it's like putting it in there,
Right.
but like I'm not like, let me write this poem about being a Black gay trans guy with who's disabled and from New Jersey, like it's not it's not like that, like it's not at the top of my mind, but of course it's who I am, so it's the way that I'm gonna write.
Right. I want to say that answer was definitely bomb. I'm gonna say that also I feel like that answer really, like whoever is like listening right now or whoever may be in the audience who may identify as like a disabled person or identify with like the trans masculinity or the lupus or anything, I really feel like that was like encouraging. So like really thank you for that answer, like really.
Okay, so we have another audience question asking, who are some of the poets that inspire you?
I like this question so much. So my mentor, Leah Lakshmi Piapsana Samar Singha, is a disabled poet and like true originator. If you are a trans person who is also a disabled person, you should absolutely read Eli Clare today. Eli Clare is a disabled trans man who has cerebral palsy. He's been writing for so long and helped shape what disability justice means. And Jay Dodd, who is my pressmate, she is a Black trans woman who has several collections of poetry. I mean, she has a lot of poetry out. I'm gonna squint over to my bookshelf. I really like Tommy Pico. Tommy Pico writes really cool stuff. And Chen Chen. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Oh, and also read Cameron Awkward Rich and also Yan Yi. Yeah, Yan Yi and Cameron Awkward Rich are also trans masculine poets of color.
Awesome. Okay, so I've been wanting to talk about this because my great aunt is a librarian. Okay, she worked at the Ferry Avenue branch library in Camden, New Jersey. But I read this about you and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is like so freaking amazing. Let's talk about the Brooklyn Public Library. Okay, you are the first inaugural Brooklyn Public Library poet in residence. Nearly 80 poets applied for this role and you were chosen. Like, yes.
Can you talk about what that role means for you and why did you apply for this role?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a secret that, I mean, I've mentioned that I really just be applying for stuff. Like if I think that I'm like remotely qualified for anything, I will put my name in the hat because I feel like a lot of times minoritized people don't do that. We just assume that we're not qualified and we don't do it. So when I saw it come across, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna get this, but I'm gonna apply. I'm just going to apply. I met the qualifications, and so I applied. And um, that's really the truth. Like I saw that it was there. I live in Brooklyn. I'm a librarian. I'm a poet. I had a book out. That was one of the qualifications. So why not me? Like when I see these kinds of things, that's what I always ask. I'm just like, why not me? Why wouldn't it be me? Like, sure, it may be somebody else, but like, it may be me. And this time it was. And that's the attitude I try to bring to everything.
So I'm honestly gonna say that saying why not me, that's a good way of self-encouragement. That I just wanted to point that out. Because really, why not yourself?
Yeah, why not?
So can I ask, like, what are some of the responsibilities you have as poet? Oh my goodness. What are some of the responsibilities you have as poet in residence?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I get to
right
be mentored
now?
by the
What is happening? My phone just fell like 2 times. Let me be honest with the people, 2 times. So this is great.
Okay. All right. Yes. So the responsibilities. Okay. So I have to teach a class. I'm teaching a free class that's ending. And also I'm going to be giving a free event that's blended. It's going to be disabled poets who live in Brooklyn or New York, probably more New York. And part of it's going to be in person, like very small in person at the Brooklyn Public Library. And then part of it is going to be people remotely so that we can practice what it's like when like people aren't all in the same place when we're done. Because I'm worried that like once, the pandemic is over in the way that the flu is over, because, it's kind of probably here to stay to some extent, but just like seasonally. People are going to not want to do things online anymore, which is going to be really bad for disabled people again, because we've been asking for these things for many years, right? Like remote work, it's like something that disabled people ask for all the time, but like for some reason we couldn't get it until 2020. So I think some of the best things to do is practice blended events, and so that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. We wanted to get a little personal with you, if you don't mind. I know you were telling us about like, you coming out in high school, but you came more out as like an adult. Like what age did you exactly know like your true identity? And do you have any advice for any like, youth, adult, teenagers, anybody who may want to come out to various family or friends, because it can be hard.
Yeah, it definitely can be hard. And one of the things I would say, just to put the advice first, is that like coming out is not a one-time event. Okay. You know what? Like, I feel like people be coming out a lot of different times. I personally have identified as the L, the G, the B, and the T. I have bingo, so like I've come out a lot of times. But when I say that, like, this is what, like as a gay person, I came out, I was never really in. So I'm queer spawn. I was raised by a lesbian couple, I guess 2 women, but one of my parents was gender nonconforming. So, I didn't really know what it was to be in until my, stepfather came around and he was very homophobic. So, it was difficult to like ever go back in because I was a gender nonconforming kid. And, there were always lesbians around. So there was no reason for me to like have to force it, because nobody was ever like, wear these clothes, do this thing. It was not a thing in my home until I was older. And then it was like, oh gosh, like, what do you mean? Like, I can't stop, whatever. But I think I realized I was trans around 17. And, this is back before there were any kinds of, there wasn't even really gay stuff at the time. And I'm not even that old. I just turned 32 last week. So like, which probably seems old to a great many people in this audience, but like, it's not old. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's not that old, but like there was not gay stuff. There certainly wasn't no trans stuff, and I would have to like sneak and watch trans stuff. And there was not a lot of it, and it was all incredibly white. So I had a girlfriend at the time, or like a person, I was dating someone who was also trans masculine, and they came out to me I came out to them and they said, there can only be one in a relationship. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because sometimes that's what being autistic is like as well. Yeah, but that's how people talk back back then. Like you couldn't be both, like people thought you couldn't be both kinds of people. And I still hear it sometimes. Right, yeah, like it just like apparently it wouldn't, like you couldn't do it. Like it's against the rules. And people felt that way even about gender nonconforming people being together in like the Black community when I was that age. So it took me a long time. I tried to come out again in college and they told me I was too femme, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess okay. And then I found out when I was like an adult, like a proper, adult, like maybe 23 or 22, I finally met a gay Black trans guy. And I was like, oh no, my life will have to change. And yeah, it did. It changed really rapidly. And 10 years later, I'm much happier. Yeah. And so I'd say, in terms of coming out to your family and friends, like people who reject you, like don't deserve to be in your life. They don't. So like if you're feeling, and I understand that like as a young person, and I truly understand that as a young person, particularly as a minor, someone who's not an adult, you can't necessarily get out of that situation. And I respect that, right? Do whatever you have to do to keep yourself safe. But also like you will eventually be 18 and you don't have to be around people who don't care about you, even if they have a name like a family name, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like the people in your life who deserve to be in your life should love and support you.
I feel like, in regards to like living your truth as well, like, you're living your truth. Like you are like proof that like, living your truth can bring you happiness, can bring you joy, and I really admire you for that. Like, that's just, it's so amazing. It's so amazing, so
it happens
also
every day.
Thank you for responding to that again.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I want to really stress that, like, when I was at HiTOPS, I was having a really hard time and it was not a good time, like it was difficult. And all of high school and middle school was very difficult, but like, and not even in like an it gets better way, but like eventually you have more control over your life and like those things don't matter as much. And so, if you can't do anything else, try to find other people around you who support you and care about you and pour into you and understand you and see you, if you can't get out of that situation, and know that it's not going to be forever, because eventually you'll have more control over your situation and the people who are around you.
Okay, so as we're nearing the end of the interview, I want to talk about how this year the forum's theme is finding connections in isolation. As a member of the Youth Advisory Board, we had to answer that question. It was really cool to see everyone's perspective, so we would love to know what finding connections in isolation means to you.
Yeah. I think that finding connection in isolation has meant not being reach out and let people know you're leaving. Because a lot of, because I have lupus, I've been quarantined alone for a year. So it has not been easy. And I think that part of what has made it possible for me to be quarantined so long is reaching out to the people who care about me and, really being able to trust that the people who say that they care about me and who I have in my life really do. And so even if I am, like physically distanced from my friends and like I can't get out as much because there's a deadly virus that's sweeping the world, I can still, call someone on the phone. I can still send somebody I care about a text. I can still tell someone how, important their friendship is to me. And, that's really what connection is. It's not always, you can't always, be in person, but you can still connect with others. And I think that is really important how much this year showed us all of the different ways we have to care about the people in our lives.
So I've been waiting to ask this entire time. So lastly, would you do us the honor of reciting one of your poems?
It would be my pleasure. And here's a Jersey one just for the Jersey people. It's called Jersey Femmes in the Philly Zoo. A flamingo knows, even without pink lipstick, femme is a feeling. Black boots, Raritan tap water memories flow, murderous brown geese fly from Johnson Park, arrive, then turn up their beaks. What's this supposed to be? They inquire. I find cover in the leopard print femme next to me because here, always someone looking, someone stares, caught in plexiglass, refracting the light in your life. No, it's not you. They look to consume, especially spring and when the ice cream melts before it is lapped up. Philadelphia is lilac and lightning strike before a great storm. Electric strangers cuff biceps unexpectedly, backdraw straight. Horror. They look to consume. They desire to control predatory birds, eagles, owls, all swooping down with catching claws, no glass to hide you. I want my armor, an exoskeleton tough, hewn of crushed velvet, bristling with defense, a Kevlar of tenderness enveloping me. This is what happens when the tree blooms, the axeman runs to chop it down. This is what happens when creatures meant for the deep somehow crawl ashore. They will be lapped up by the hot eyes of the sea, pulled tight by strange hands, knives licking their neck, the scent of wisteria, fireworks, flash bang, flash fire, roll flame, clip wings from those who maim us, declaw them all bare. Maybe they will burn corralled while lights dance in the sky, steaming macho ash. And if they must live, then make me invisible, hide me, erase me. Thank you.
Amazing. Oh my God. Thank you, Cyree, so much for being here with us today. It was, oh my God, it was truly an honor. And I'm like, I was trying like not to be like fanboying, like, ah.
Thank you so much for asking me to be here. It means a lot to me.
And thank you to everyone watching at home, and thank you to all of our amazing sponsors. Cyree, thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone wants to order a copy of Slingshot, where can they go to get a copy?
On the internet. Really, just type it in.
Y'all have been a great audience today. Spaces like this give us, somewhere to connect and make our voices heard, especially during emotionally challenging times. We appreciate having the opportunity to connect with such a strong, supportive community. With that being said, please stick around because we're holding a raffle right now with some of our favorite HiTOPS staff that helped us make today happen.
And actually, 3 lucky winners will be receiving Cyree's book, Slingshot.
Yay. Later, guys, gals, and non-binary pals with a Bye.